My name is Jonathan Mark. I'm with Flyby News and Valley911truth.org. We're here at GCTV Studios in Greenfield, Massachusetts with Robert Bowman and Tom Fennell. Robert Bowman came into our area on a tour for the Patriots, and he's here to kind of let us know about what he's been doing mostly. But first we're going to ask him about his background. Could you introduce yourself and share how you got to this point and what background you have?
Sure. I'm Bob Bowman, retired Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, flew 101 combat missions in Vietnam as a fighter pilot. My PhD is in aeronautics and nuclear engineering from Caltech. I directed all the Star Wars programs under Presidents Ford and Carter when their existence was secret. And I'm the national commander of the Patriots. Our website is thepatriots.us. And I'm also primate of the United Catholic Church, which is a Catholic church which is independent of the Vatican and doesn't follow their man-made rules.
Fascinating. I'm wondering your work with Star Wars. What did that consist of, and what were you doing back there before I even knew about it?
Well, I directed all of the Department of Defense's Star Wars programs, and there were a lot of things going on at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and I was the executive for all those programs. We had several things going, but one that people will relate to mostly has to do with laser battle stations, because we were developing all the bits and pieces. The laser itself we were developing with TRW, the mirror, 50-foot diameter actively cooled mirror we were developing with Kodak and PerkinElmer, the tracking system we were developing, and the computers, and that was with Raytheon. We had system studies being done by Lockheed, and of course we had Aerospace Corporation advising us and doing a lot of work. We proved several things during those years. One is that a system of laser battle stations, before it got anywhere near capable of shooting down ballistic missiles, would be good enough to destroy cities in minutes, causing the kind of firestorms that consumed Dresden and Hamburg and Osaka in World War II. In other words, it was much more effective as an offensive weapon than a defensive weapon.
What energy source was it using?
These were chemical lasers.
Uh-huh.
And one thing we later discovered is that a few pounds of metal properly shaped, fired from toward the Earth from space, would impact like a meteorite, dig a crater, and at least in theory be capable of destroying hardened military targets like command bunkers and missile silos totally without warning. For years, that's all I said about these weapons. And then in a debate that I did with one of the colonels who was in the SDI program under Reagan, when I was arguing that these things would never make a defense, but they were awesome offensive weapons and ought to be banned, and we shouldn't attempt to deploy them because it would trigger nuclear war. So I went from directing all the Star Wars programs to being its fiercest critic under Reagan when he turned it from a research program trying to understand what was possible and what wasn't, and countermeasures and doing system studies, and trying to keep an open mind to what was possible and what might be in our national security interest. But always coming up with the, as far as I was concerned, the answer that it was not in our national security interest to actually develop and deploy these weapons. But of course, what we in the military used to call the lunatic fringe convinced Reagan otherwise. Danny Graham, Crazy George, Keegan, Edward Teller, these guys. And so he proceeded to turn this quiet research program into a crash program to deploy offensive weapons disguised as defense.
Has ever been used a laser weapon?
Not not in purpose against a real target. There have been tests, there have been accidents, there have been incidents where some of our satellites were blinded by lasers, ground-based lasers coming out of the eastern half of the world. And but the short answer is no, and I don't believe that they have deployed anything like that. A lot of people are worried that those things are up there orbiting today, and I really don't think so. I'm sort of out of touch now with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I had a bunch of my students and people who had worked for me in the JCS for many years, and they kept me up to date on what was going on. And as of that time, the answer was nothing. But now I don't know, because those guys have all retired or died off. It was interesting because Reagan's own Joint Chiefs of Staff called me in 1983 and early '84. And they said, Bob, you've got to do something. There's a gag order. We can't say anything. We can't write anything without it being going through the White House censors. We're totally powerless. But even if we retired, we'd still have the gag orders. But you retired in time before Reagan took over. They have no legal hold on you. You've got to warn Congress and the American people about this military lunacy. And in particular, they were concerned about the White House's plans to use the shuttle as a test bed to test the weapons against targets on the surface of the Earth. And they said if they do that, it would confirm the Russians' fear that the shuttle is just a weapons platform. I mean, they're already making propaganda like that, and of course we're denying it. But now the White House wants to actually do it, you know, and so anyway, I did get to the right people in Congress, and we were able to kill these things, but there was a lot of craziness going on.
What was the lessons that you learned from Vietnam as a combat veteran, and that was probably shaped you in a certain way?
Well, yeah, I learned that war is hell.
Yeah.
I also learned that war is addictive, because when they tried to transfer me back to Korea from Vietnam after I'd completed 101 missions, it was only supposed to be 100, but on my 100th mission, my wingman had a mechanical problem and couldn't take care of the target. So I had to go back, pick up another wingman, and make a 101st mission to take care of the target. So, but after that, they tried to send me back to Korea, where I had just come from before my Vietnam tour. One-time good deal, Korea to Vietnam to Korea. And I didn't want to go, because I was so caught up in the war and the mission and all the rest of it, I didn't want to leave. And looking back on it, it's hard for me to understand that, but I can understand that war is addictive. And it's also dehumanizing. It didn't get me, fortunately, but I flew with some people that would go down and take out a fisherman on a sampan. And I said, how did you know he was VC? And he said, oh, who cares? It's all body count. I mean, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I learned a lot of lessons from Vietnam. What I learned from fighting Star Wars for the Reagan administration is that one person can make a difference.
Yeah. And
that's still true today.
Well, I found that with WikiLeaks. Recently, somebody from the Pentagon released a massacre in New Baghdad, in a suburb, showing these Reuter journalists and civilians and children being harmed by, as you say, insensitivity.
Sounds like deja vu all over again.
Right, and the soldier that was talking about that became a conscientious objector said that he wasn't blaming the soldiers. He was saying it was the training. They were just doing what they were trained to do. Yeah. And that should open up a bigger topic, which you've been doing.
By the word, you heard for a second from my old buddy Tom Fennell. We went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute together. We both graduates of there. And great institution, by the way, and we learned a lot. One of the things that came out of RPI is really germane to all of this, because my very first week there, one of the professors in the Introduction to Engineering said, what is engineering? The definition of engineering is the application of science and technology to human needs. Mm-hmm. That really struck me, and what I got out of that is that if you want to really be a good engineer, right, you not only have to understand science and technology, you have to understand human needs, and you have to put it all together. That's what too many people don't do.
Wow. Well, Tom, give us some of your experiences with Bob and how you've been following him and how it hits you and what brought you together right now.
Yeah, well, I live in Brattleboro, which isn't very far from here. And I'm hoping that in addition to GCTV, we can have the same show aired on BCTV. Yes. And on a very short notice, Bob called me up about 2 weeks ago and said he was going to be in the area. And could I help him find some place to give his message? And of course I called you and a few other people, and you came through with me, and we're here now. Yeah. Brattleboro, of course, is not very far away. I had Bob in Brattleboro at least 2 occasions where he was talking. Yeah. Once he gave a very interesting speech, which was what his speech would have been had he been inaugurated as President of the United States. Right. So here's Bob talking about what he would do if he was the newly elected President of the United States. And another follow-up speech was about a year later, which was your State of the Union speech, kind of on the same theme. And in that, I learned an awful lot about how you think, which I found was very interesting because I thought a lot, in a lot of the same ways. Also, some other things that I remember you talking about or touching in your speeches was 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I can remember the one thing that impressed me most about it was the lack of the intercept fighters when these planes are floating around the air for several hours. And if I recall correctly, you said you did that job one time.
Oh yeah, I'm an old interceptor pilot.
And you were at Andrews Air Force Base.
I know how long it takes, I know the procedures. And a lot of people say, well, our government knew that 9/11 was going to happen and they did nothing. And of course that is totally false. Because if our government had done nothing that day and had just let normal procedures take place, those planes, whatever it was that hit the Twin Towers, would have been intercepted long before they got there. Mm-hmm. The Twin Towers would still be standing and thousands of dead Americans would still be alive. So this is not a case of incompetence. This is treason.
Well, that brings us to the big issue, because that's how I met you from the Boston Tea Party, when, the original one that for 9/11 Truth.
It's a different Tea Party, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not the.
That was the one where they wore the Revolutionary War costumes and actually threw tea in the river. Didn't they?
Actually, there was the original Tea Party, and then before the Boston Tea Party that we met, there was another Boston Tea Party in 2000 that I participated in, where we got on the old original Tea Party ship and we threw television sets into the sea. And the reason for doing that was to protest the fact that all of the third-party candidates, like Ralph Nader, had been left out of the debates that were going on in Boston at that time. And so the very day of the debate, we were doing this Boston Tea Party thing. The one where you met, we were protesting the not official 9/11 Commission report, or omission report, as many of us call it, and the fact that it was a whitewash and had a lot of untruth in it. And by the way, I have talked with both Congressman Hamilton and Governor Kane, the co-chairs of that commission, and they both admit that there are outright falsehoods in that report. They couldn't do anything about it. Philip Zelikow wrote it. They had no control over it. And of course, he's a White House flack and a neocon. And
it's funny you mention that, because I've got a little note here that talks about the senior counsel for the 9/11 Commission, John Farmer. And he wrote a book called The Ground Truth. And there's a quote from the book. It says, At some level of the government, at some point in time, there was an agreement not to tell the truth about what happened.
Absolutely.
I was shocked at how different the truth was from the way it was described. The NORAD air defense tapes told a radically different story from what had been told to us, and to the public for 2 years. This is not spin. And it's very interesting. Now, I don't pretend to know what happened on 9/11. I only know that what they told us is not what happened.
Yeah, we've been lied to, we know that. And when you combine this whole thing about the official report with the confiscation of videotapes and audio tapes and black boxes and other evidence by the FBI, it's clear that regardless of who was responsible for 9/11, the subsequent cover-up was itself a conspiracy involving elements of the White House and the intelligence establishment.
Well, yeah, this is partly why we're working on this misprision of treason campaign, because we have evidence of treason, and everyone's ignoring it, and the media is controlled, and here we are trying to bring that to light, because it means all the difference in the world to our future. If 9/11 continues with this lie, and we're going to keep going down this path of no return to endless war and to martial law and financial downfalls.
And fascism.
And fascism.
Yeah.
And so it's key. So I'd like to encourage people to go to the Patriots .us and also flybynews.com and look for the misprision of treason and try to understand what that's about, because it's a very critical code in U.S. conduct that says that if you see a crime and you owe allegiance to the United States, you have a responsibility to report it to some judge, to some governor, the president. And so I encourage more the judges and the governors, because the president knows it, and it's the key deceptor of what really happened. And he keeps saying that 9/11 was the reason why we're expanding the war in Afghanistan.
And, you know, before Barack Obama became president, I went to his Senate office. I saw Barack personally, very briefly. But I sat down with his chief of staff for an hour talking about the Iraq War, the need to impeach Cheney and Bush, and 9/11. And I have a 3-minute video, which I call my smoking gun video, because I think it is absolute proof that we've been lied to about 9/11. And I showed that to his chief of staff. Now, this smoking gun video is all about World Trade Center Building 7, which fell hours later, about 5-something in the afternoon of 9/11, without ever having been struck by an aircraft. And his chief of staff said he had never heard of Building 7. And this is like, you know, 7 years after the thing happened. Wow. There are a lot of people out there in the country that have never heard about Building 7, and they really need to. If you get a chance to show my 3-minute video, go for it. And by the way...
Well, why don't we cut it in right now?
Great.
Okay, we're going to show this film, and then we'll come right back.
Building number 7 at the World Trade Center was a 47-story building with a steel frame. No airplane crashed into it, nor did the towers fall onto it. However, this building disintegrated on September 11th.
More on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know, but New York very much a city still in chaos. The phones are not working properly, the subway lines are not working.
July 24th, 2001, Larry A. Silverstein, who already owned World Trade Center 7, signs a $3.2 billion 99-year lease on the entire World Trade Center complex 6 weeks before 9/11. Included in the lease is a $3.5 billion insurance policy, specifically covering acts of terrorism.
PBS has a documentary called America Rebuilds, in which Larry Silverstein, the landlord of Building 7, explains what happened.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
That video is on my website. It's downloadable. Anybody can download that thing to a DVD and copy it and use it. I use it when I go lobby Congress. Like I say, I was in Barack Obama's office. We went around to several offices. And you know, when you go into somebody's office, you're not going to get them to sit down with you for 2 hours and watch loose change. But 3 minutes, you can get them to sit still. Have it in your laptop or stick it in their DVD player in their conference room. They've all got one. And play the dumb thing. Because I don't think there's anybody that can watch that and believe the government story.
Does it, and it details the thermite, nanothermite, or is it?
No, I made this before the nanothermite came out. I mean, that's further proof. But all this does is talk about Larry Silverstein and his decision to pull it. It talks about, I love the BBC announcing the collapse before it happened.
You mean the one with the building in the background?
Right over her left shoulder, yeah. And finally, of course, just one after another view of Building 7 coming down, in what appears to be the controlled demolition of an intact building with no visible fires.
Yes. And that was the basis of the story of the reflecting pool, by the way. Building 7 was the smoking gun, and honors your work. I'd like to mention about the, since I mentioned about the nanothermite.
I was going to ask you about that.
And it's it's basically, there was a research done by Stephen Jones and International, Niels Harrit, and others. Let me have it right here. This work was published in the Open Chemistry and Physics Journal, and the title of the paper was...
Prominent peer-reviewed journal.
Active thermitic material discovered in dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center catastrophe. And one of the authors, Neil Harrit, in a German interview in May 2009 said, "There are no experts on nanothermite without connections to the military. This stuff has only been prepared under military contracts in the U.S. And probably in bigger allied countries. This is secret military research. It was not prepared in a cave in Afghanistan." And that's the only thing that could explain the way the building came down. And now that it's discovered, you would think it wouldn't be known all over. But here there is a major censorship of what's really going on.
Yeah, I'd like to just take a minute to explain to folks why we're still talking about 9/11 9 years after the fact. And the reason is very simple. We have ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Over 5,000 of our finest young men and women have died in those conflicts. Over 40,000 of our injured soldiers, their lives will never be the same. Tens of thousands of our young men and women have serious mental illnesses because of what they have seen and what they have done. Hundreds of thousands have have been exposed to depleted uranium and will suffer lives of pain and disability and will father thousands of children with severe birth defects. The military is totally demoralized and stretched. The VA system is underfunded and overwhelmed. The National Guard and Reserves, tour after tour, destroying lives for even the lucky ones that come back home. Our national treasury is depleted. Our civil rights are being taken away with the Patriot Act and all of that. All of it blamed on 9/11. We have churches teaching hatred of Muslims. They don't worship the same God, and they this and that. And this country is suffering because of the lie of 9/11. If we can get the truth out, if people can understand that we have been lied to, that these wars had no basis in fact, there was no reason for these wars except the profitability of multinational oil companies.
Yes.
And geopolitics on a grand scale, seizing Iraq as a staging base for controlling Iran and Syria and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia and the southern Russian republics around the Baltic and the Black Sea, and $10 trillion worth of oil and gas, which now is probably worth about $60 trillion. If people understand that giving our sons and our daughters and our freedoms and the cash of our grandchildren for generations has been for profits for a tiny fraction of the wealthy elite, maybe people will rise up and say, okay, I want to know what happened and how it happened and who done it.
Right.
Because the 9/11 Commission was never asked that, and we have never been told that, and by God, we need to know.
And what do you think about the right versus the left elements in Barack Obama? I mean, everybody is, is this just to distract people, and they get different types of people coming in to continue the same methods? And even the peace movement has been unable to deal with the 9/11 as the cause, even though Barack Obama says it directly, you know, this is why we're doing this, they won't touch it, and they're almost like offended at a 9/11 truth. They're working with them, saying, why don't you work with us too? It hasn't happened
I work
so
with
far.
a lot of peace groups. I've been sort of full-time whistleblower and troublemaker within the peace movement for 27 years. And it really pains me that there are parts of the peace movement that won't have anything to do with the 9/11 truth movement, even though if it weren't for the 9/11 lies, we wouldn't have the wars we're contending with.
Well, why?
And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure whether they just can't believe that people somewhere within the bowels of our government could do anything that evil to kill 3,000 of our own people. But then my comeback to that is, open your eyes. Those folks have killed over 5,000 of our own people fighting their dumb wars. If they're willing to make that sacrifice of our lives for their profits, why can't you believe they would also sacrifice 3,000 in the World Trade Centers?
We're up against something that isn't mentioned much. The psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. That means when you're confronted with something that violates your preconceived notions so greatly, you put it out of your mind.
Right.
You use every excuse you can think of to fool yourself into believing the elephant isn't in the living room.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's true. I go around trying to create cognitive dissonance because without it, people are just fat, dumb, and happy and going down the tubes.
Right.
And so I love to create cognitive dissonance because it's the only way sometimes to get people, the next time they see something about it, they look at it a little differently, they think about it a little bit. You got to create that first before you can convert people to actually wanting to look at the truth. But, you know, it's like I say every time I go to preach in church, I warn the parishioners, Jesus came to comfort the afflicted. I came to afflict the comfortable.
That says it pretty clear. And we better be successful, otherwise our future is in danger.
Yeah.
And do you have hope, Tom, that we can turn this around?
I certainly do. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I'd be off on a mountaintop somewhere.
Yeah.
I know, contemplating my navel.
Why?
I know we can. Well, there are a lot of reasons, including the fact that the alternative is just too gruesome to think about. But it's happened a lot in the past, and if you look at civilization over the long haul, there have been ups and downs, but the trajectory is up. And I believe that this experiment, this republic of ours, with a touch of democracy mixed in, is going to succeed and is going to get back to its roots, is going to start following the Constitution, honoring the truth, and serving the people. Because that's the kind of government we're supposed to have, and that's the kind of government we must have again, and we will. I'm not sure how fast it'll happen. It may not happen in my lifetime, but it will happen. And if it means that the United States of America as we know it goes away and something else rises out of the ashes, that something else will be better yet. But I think our Constitution is an inspired document, and I would like to keep it going. There's a lot of people who say, let's have a constitutional convention and improve things, and I say, hell no. Yeah. Let's just start abiding by the Constitution we have.
The way it's
That's
written.
A good first step.
It's a pretty good document to begin with.
And the only kind of a change that I would like to see, an amendment that I would like to see, which would really help in this instance, is one that restores the original intent of the Founding Fathers and writers of the Constitution. For example, I have long proposed an amendment which says, corporations and other fictitious entities are not persons under this Constitution and shall have none of the rights and privileges thereof. Period.
Isn't that a simple statement?
Isn't that simple? And it's exactly what our forefathers intended. Corporations didn't even exist. They were creatures of the states, chartered for a specific purpose for a short period of time to accomplish something, build a bridge or whatnot, and then go out of business. The modern corporation is something that was never intended, and they certainly shouldn't have so-called First Amendment free speech rights to spend as much money as they want buying up elections and voters and legislation.
And they're immortal. And if they do something wrong, you can't put them in jail.
That's right. That's right. So, those are the kind of things that need fixing. But Constitutional Convention, no, because I'm afraid they'd throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Right. Bob, I've heard you speak many times, and you're one of the few speakers I've heard who can really resonate with what I will call both the right and the left. Two different extremes who I think have been being played against each other. I think we really have common cause. Why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, we have been artificially divided all this time between Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, right and left. And they do that on purpose so that we don't get together and resist them, the big money interests who are running the government. And the way they do that is to divvy things up between the political parties, both of which they own. And they get the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership, and they take things and say, okay, you guys be for abortion, you be against it. You be for school prayer, you be against it. You be for gay rights, you be against it. You be for gun control, you be against it. And the thing that all those have in common, besides the fact that the federal government probably has no business mucking around with them in the first place, is that the wealthy elite could care less how it turns out. Those things do not affect their bottom line. Right. They just don't care. But on issues that matter to them, signing a trade deal to drive down wages and drive up profits, going to war to secure an oil and gas pipeline, those things, they make sure both major political parties are as one.
Right.
And we have seen that time and again. After all, it was Bill Clinton's administration that gave us NAFTA. It was Al Gore, the hero of the environmental movement, who was Clinton's hatchet man to cram NAFTA down the throats of a reluctant Congress. We've seen it time and again that when it comes to those kinds of issues, and it was Clinton's responsibility for the rape of Yugoslavia, and 70 continuous days of bombing, violating the War Powers Act, violating the Constitution, violating 2 votes of Congress who did not give him the authority to go to war against Kosovo or Yugoslavia or any of them. Those things we have to remember when we look back and we say, oh, George W. Bush was the worst president we've ever had. And I think he probably was. And he did more to undermine true conservative principles of fiscal responsibility and avoidance of foreign military entanglements and protection of the individual rights of Americans. The Bush administration did more to destroy all 3 of those pillars of conservatism than all previous administrations and all our enemies combined. But as bad as that was, we can't get into thinking this is a right-left, conservative Republican or Democrat Republican issue, because the Democrats have been guilty of all the same things, just with a smile and a wink and a gentler tone. And so we need a complete change. We need to get the corporations out of ruling our government. We need to separate big money and political power, because when those 2 get together, you've got fascism.
Right.
And we need populism. We need a government that serves the people. Abraham Lincoln, of the people, by the people, for the people. That must be our objective.
Well, it's like 9/11 being such a big lie, and to initiate this new, it's like a coup d'etat, and you're saying all these politicians are controlled. That's probably why we work on 9/11, because it could have the opposite result if we can expose it. And we're talking more than just about 9/11 or one administration or another. We're talking about the history of our country, and especially into the 1800s when corporations got some human rights, and the courts and the corruption has gotten deeper and deeper. But what do you think is the best way of exposing this big lie? So, and do you think that by exposing 9/11, what would result? I'd be curious.
I think the country would change completely for the better. People would see that, oh my God, the Muslims are not the enemy.
Right.
They would see that those wars in which we've sacrificed so much and so many of our people were to serve the financial interests of a wealthy few. They will have seen that they had been had. Their eyes will be open to the fact that the wages of ordinary Americans today are 1/3 of what they were in the 1950s. That all the wealth has been sucked to the top by the Fed, by the interest, by all of this, and by them owning the government. We have the best Congress money can buy, and we've always got a president, ever since Kennedy, we've got a president handpicked by the Trilateral Commission. Kennedy was the last president, indeed the last nominee of either major party, to have not been a member of the Trilateral Commission and handpicked by them. And of course we know what happened to Kennedy.
Right.
And
is that because he wasn't being controlled? I mean, he wouldn't let himself be controlled?
He wouldn't let himself be controlled. And another watershed, of course, was Kennedy's assassination, because if that hadn't happened, just as with 9/11, the Vietnam War would have ended.
Yes.
Kennedy had already ordered that. Kennedy was trying to make peace with the Soviet Union. He solved the Cuban Missile Crisis. He and Khrushchev. He and Nikita Khrushchev had been exchanging letters and envoys and everything, working together to solve the Cold War and to end it. Cuban Missile Crisis came up, and of course Kurt LeMay and the other generals and whatnot wanted to bomb Cuba, and Kennedy said no. And instead he redoubled his efforts with Khrushchev Khrushchev recognized the situation that Kennedy was in because Khrushchev had his own hardliners that he had to deal with. And so Khrushchev stopped his warships and said, I'm going to take my missiles out. That ended the Cuban Missile Crisis. But we have later learned, after the fact, years after the fact, when Kremlin documents were revealed and declassified, that the Soviets had, I think it's 162 missiles in Cuba.
Right.
And they were armed and ready to fire. And if we had started attacking with a first strike on Cuba, they would have launched on warning, and all hell would have broken loose, and probably the world would have been destroyed. I often ask people, you want something scary? What would have happened if George W. Bush had been president at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Shudder, shudder.
We wouldn't be here now.
There's some miracles and everything.
So, we need to have the truth. We need to have our history straightened out.
Right.
We need to expose the truth of JFK's assassination by elements within the CIA and the FBI and the Pentagon and the Secret Service. We need to expose the truth of 9/11 by whoever it was. I don't know whether it was Americans or Israelis or Saudis or Pakistanis or some combination.
Yeah.
But whoever it was needs to be exposed, because by God, I know doggone well that 19 Arabs with hijackers and an old man on a cave on a dialysis machine couldn't have pulled that off.
And we know for certainty that it's the U.S. government that's been involved with the cover-up.
Yes, the cover-up, we have the evidence, we can stick them with that. Yeah. And I think that ought to be where we start. We start by your misprision of treason, by saying the Bush administration committed treason by exploiting the 9/11 tragedy. However you believe it happened, they exploited it to lie the Congress and the American people into an unnecessary war of aggression against Afghanistan and then against Iraq. Secondly, after you do that, then you start prosecutions for the cover-up.
Right.
And once you're going through that, then you'll get more facts come to light, which will lead then to a real investigation of 9/11 itself and whoever actually pulled it off. But there's a lot else we can do first. We don't need to wait for an investigation of 9/11. We can indict them now for exploiting 9/11,
yes,
and then indict them for covering it up, and finally we'll get them for doing it.
Let's hope. Any last thoughts, Tom?
Well, I guess, I think, Bob, you said you brought some other DVDs with you, or some other short film clips?
Yeah.
Maybe after this is over, we can show them too.
That'd be great.
Well,
we'll be making copies, and we'll be making sure that the community TV centers can air these things, and people can understand what we're talking about from many different levels, because we're talking about one issue, but it's connected to many issues. And it's a pleasure being with you. Somebody from the inside that has come forth in integrity. You're a gift to our world. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Keep up your good work.
And you, likewise, you're an inspiration.
Great being with you again.
As always.
I see an America in which every family can be supported by one wage earner with one job paying a living wage. It's an America in which health care is provided to all as a right through a single-payer national health program. By the way, as a conservative, I believe that the only fiscally responsible way to provide health care is to eliminate the profit, the overhead, the red tape, and the interference between doctor and patient of the insurance companies by kicking them out of health care altogether. I see an America that seeks not to be king of the hill, nor subservient to the World Trade Organization, but to be a responsible, sovereign member of the family of nations. Nothing more and nothing less. An America that is free of the threat of terrorism because it is no longer feared and hated because it no longer does hateful things to people around the world. It's an America that leads the world, not just with military might, but with its vision, its compassion, its democracy, its productivity, its freedom, its standard of living, its care for the global environment, its treatment of its own people, and its goodness. Above all, it's an America at peace with the world and with its own people. That's the kind of America I have seen, the America our people deserve, and the America you can build. I can't do it alone. Each of you must do your part. Spread the word. Keep the vision alive. Drop your own pebbles in the pond and make some waves. Run for office. Never settle for anything less than a government that follows the Constitution, honors the truth, and serves the people. Now, it matters not if my presidency is real or fanciful. My part is done. It is finished. The rest is in your hands. The future and the vision and the dream itself depend on you. Free at last of the unwarranted influence of the military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned us of. Free at last of the gross disparities in living standards which have plagued recent decades. Free at last of the ravages of unbridled militarism and false flag attacks. Free at last of the creeping fascism of corporate-controlled government. Free at last, we can go forward into a bright new day of democracy, prosperity, security, freedom, and peace. We the people can win. We the people must win. We the people will win. Thank you.